Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 203. I'm Enigmaeus, and today we're continuing with the discovery build, working on the nacelles, specifically the underside of the nacelles. Since the last episode, I went in and I filled in the bottom part just so that it was flat and ready to continue with this part of the build. After looking at what we had at the end of the last episode, I feel it's good for what it is, but looking at it, there was something that was missing. And the nice thing about this is that I don't get to take credit for any of the design. This is all the best that I can do to duplicate an existing design from some people who quite possibly looked at things the same way that I did and said it's missing something, and added this extra bit on the underside that really has the potential to make a big difference in terms of the overall feel that you get when you look at the nacelles once it's all said and done. So I went back and I remeasured from the drawing like we showed in that one episode, just to make sure that I had sort of everything still keeping as close as possible to the actual scale of this particular part of the ship. It's going to be extremely difficult to even pretend that this is a proper duplicate of the nacelles, particularly on the underside, because there were some angles involved that were a little bit difficult to manage, I guess would be one way to put it. It would have been very, very difficult to do the underside the way that we're going to do it if we had have done everything exactly the way it was in the drawings, because it wasn't perfectly flat along the underside. It had a bit of a slope from the front to the back. It was just a very minor slope, but it was still noticeable in the drawings, and I chose not to follow that. I chose to just put the underside component onto the nacelle while ignoring that slope, and I think that it's going to turn out just fine. It certainly saved a lot of time trying to figure out a lot of really nitpicky details that we don't have to deal with, having chosen to omit that part of things. But the first thing that I wanted to do, what you're seeing here, is taking that profile, the front profile that we had, that we marked with the yellow blocks, and sort of turning that into a full shape. So instead of just the blocks doing the connect the dots kind of thing, we actually connected the dots and fleshed it out a little bit so that we could see what it would look like, and just make sure that we were kind of on point, that we would be able to make it all come together in a way that was a fairly reasonable representation of the way that the profile actually looked. And I think we got it, and it's a good starting point, and now we just basically work from this profile to the front and this profile to the back, and that should be sufficient, one might hope, to see us through basically to completion of this whole thing. And you can see we're just working towards the back now. We've got that gradual slope kind of working from this profile all the way back, and now we're going to work from the profile to the front in the same way. And all we're really trying to do at this point is we're basically, for all practical intents and purposes, we're still drawing a line. It's just a very wide line to save a little bit of time, and we're just doing our best to connect all of these red dots. Now, these are the ones that I remeasured. So when I first loaded up the game, I went through and I removed all of the little red blocks that I still had in place from the first time we put that profile in there, and put in the new ones based on the measurements that I did. And I'm very, very happy that I did that, because it made a pretty tremendous difference overall in terms of the contribution that this part of the ship makes to the way the nacelles kind of look. So it's a little bit different from what we saw in the last episode. And all I'm doing at this point is trying to make sure that we've got the transitions of this line, this extra wide line, going from the front of the ship through the whole profile and then tapering off at the back in a way that it's true to that shape in the drawing. It's very, very straightforward what the goal is at this point. We don't have to worry too much about compound angles or curves or anything like that, because it's just one great big long line, and it has some curves in it, but they're just one isolated curve that we have to follow. We don't have to worry about it intersecting with other things at this point. Once we get this part all sort of connected up, we get it all the way up to the front, then we've got that profile from the front view that we already did, that we did at the beginning of the video. And between the line that we're doing now and that line, we've got all that we need as a basis for working through the entire shape and filling it all in and getting it to be what we want it to be. So the interesting thing that I found is that when it's all said and done, the final shape that we're going to be working with is something that I'm very, very happy with. It's adding that thing that was missing to what we had from the nacelles in the last episode without making it needlessly complex, but really sort of giving it that sort of feel that's it's not dull. To be honest, even though we had some nice curves and stuff going on at the end of the last episode with what we had done, they were just kind of dull, sitting there like sticks on the end of the supports holding them to the central hull. And there's just a feeling that it needs that extra something. And if I didn't have sort of something like this to look forward to, I would probably be pretty disappointed if we had to leave the nacelles where they were and not take advantage of this little extra bit of detailing that we get to put in place. Now, once we're done with this episode, we still have one more element to add to the underside of the nacelles. It's a little bit more complex than this. It's part of the drawing. It's not something that I'm adding or anything like that, but it's not especially large compared to what we're putting into place now. And between this stuff that we're adding now and that part that we'll probably have done by the end of the next episode, the nacelles just look kind of like they belong on a sports car. It's just the way that I see them, they look a lot more beefy. It looks like it's got something powerful in there that's very, very fitting, first of all, because this is where the ship's propulsion and the ship's power generation largely comes from. But also, it's just the part of the design that the people who made the ship basically had all kinds of liberty to create something that you could understand being on a ship a certain number of years into the future. It's relatable because of the shapes and the way everything sort of comes together. It's not this out there kind of super weird space structure thing that also happens to move. It's just got a lot of really, really interesting lines and curves that fit with everything else. It used to be that the saucer section was my favorite part of this ship, and I still like it. I really like it. But this design with the nacelles is actually pretty outstanding from my point of view. And again, I'm giving full credit to the people who designed it, who are not me, for what they did. I'm just hopeful that by the time everything is all said and done, that we're able to do it justice. But I think, based on what I've been seeing, that's probably going to be a fairly reasonable expectation at this point. You can see we're basically just walking through the two profiles that we had. We're following the one that was marked with the yellow blocks, and then we're stepping it in every time the red blocks tell us to. So we've got a half block exposure for each of these steps, as opposed to trying to make it smooth, which would be impossible just because of the way the blocks are. Of course, they don't allow us to do all of the shapes that we can imagine. There's a limitation. So I would rather have a very consistent sort of half block step at each step along the process for all these transitions than have these really wonky sort of transitions that are distracting because they're either a mess, or best case scenario, they're as good as they can be, but they still leave those exposures. I would rather just be consistent all the way through and have it just one thing. You look at it, it's there. You don't have to worry about it being something different from what you had somewhere else on the ship. It's just very, very reliable, I guess you could say. The eye never becomes confused because from what you're seeing in the front is basically carried all the way through to the back. Outside of that, this didn't take all that long for the amount of space that we covered. just those two simple profiles, and then just kind of patiently working our way through and maintaining that half block exposure whenever we did have to make a transition. I spent a little bit of time going back and forth between the two different sides. Whenever I'd make a mistake on one side, I'd go over to the other side. But realistically speaking, I didn't worry too much about getting the whole thing done on each nacelle. I'm just doing the one half section on each nacelle, and then in between episodes I'll fill in the other half section like we did in the last episode. By the time it's all said and done, we should have a uniform, consistent design for both nacelles, and everything will work out just fine. And in the next episode, like I say, we're going to finish that last underside detail for the nacelles, just kind of gilding the lily, so to speak, at this point. And then we'll be back working on the saucer section, where we've got some details left to add. Like I said, we left them knowing that we were going to have to come back before the ship was done and get them into place. We're at that point now where there's very little left to do for the exterior structure, so going back and finishing the saucer section, those little details, nothing major, is kind of the icing on the cake. And then it'll be a great big paint and texture job, and then we'll be working on the inside, getting a few things done. I've decided, for the most part, there's a few things that I want to do in the interior that could sort of be a starting point for people who wanted to finish it. Say they wanted to use this as a part of a scenario, or they just wanted to have the ship finished inside and out. There'll be a few cues that I can offer for the interior just by getting things set up a certain way. And then the ship will be done, and it'll be blueprint time. I'm not going to do the entire interior. That would take a very substantial amount of time, and I don't even have any kind of schematic or design drawing to go off of, so it would just be me guessing and putting things in place. And as always, that's something that I'm more than happy to leave for other people to do. So there's just a couple of minutes left here. You can take a look at it, see how everything sort of goes together, the final little bits and pieces. And then in the next episode, we'll be carrying on. Progress, sweet, sweet progress. So if you want to be notified about the next episode, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.